Gnosticism and the Occult.
All right, I'm Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching Pater, PH2T3R, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here with CB Robertson today, and we're going to talk about Gnosticism and the Occult. Because people who are interested, our thing is a new thing. Solar Idealism is a new thing. And it's for people, obviously, who aren't necessarily going to be conformists. People who are conformists, well, we already know what they're going to be doing because those are the mainstream things, and they just go and do those things, and that's pretty predictable. But people who have been attracted to other things, whether it's different kinds of paganism or the occult at different points in their lives, find themselves coming into liking some of what we're saying about solar idealism, and because there's a bigger picture there, and you can see there's a lot of the mythologies and pulling things, different ideas together, but because of their backgrounds, they have a lot of different attachments to different ideas that maybe they see in a way that aren't necessarily consistent with what that thing is. And they don't see a conflict with solar idealism in the way that I think Chris and I do. Even though we don't obviously think all the same things, but I think that we both see like, this is not it. It looks like it might be, but it's not sometimes. And so I just think it's a really interesting topic. Chris made a post on Instagram about it, kind of one of those graphic carousel posts about Gnosticism. And we talked about it a little bit in the Order of Fire as well. So we thought we'd bring this discussion to here. And I just wanted to say before I get started is that there was a point while I was writing Fire in the Dark where I actually thought about calling myself a Gnostic pagan. And the reason why was purely etymological, and in reading different descriptions of Gnosticism, which, as we'll talk about, there are a lot of different descriptions of Gnosticism and they aren't necessarily consistent. I came to see it as a way of knowing through experience. In terms of like, okay, well, I had this experience. You may not have had this experience. So I can say this for me. Like I can say, here's what my experiences are. Things that I felt connected to or not, and that's my experience. And but that's not necessarily yours. And so so I wasn't really imposing it on anyone, but was like, okay, well, here's where I'm at. And so I toyed with that idea. Obviously didn't go with that idea, but it was just something I played with because Gnosticism it has all of the language that attracts us to these kind of esoteric things. And actually, well, I don't know. Do you happen to have your post handy? Your text from your post?
I do. I can.
Why don't we run through that? Is that possible? And then before I take that tangent, we should say give them some background.
Yeah, for sure. I'll pull it up and read it. But while I'm pulling it up, I see exactly where you're going with the Gnostic in the sense of experience. The famous the Oracle at Delphi, has the words "know thyself" right over the top. But the word for know is not episteme; it's gnosis. The word for know is gnosis. It implies, personal experience in that way. And another intellectual I follow was complaining recently about how, Aristotle uses this word dialectic to refer to argument. And he's like, and the frickin' Marxists and the Hegelians stole this word for no reason and made it mean something else. And so now whenever he talks about dialectic, he has to say Aristotelian dialectic as opposed to the Marxist or the Hegelian dialectic to differentiate, because Hegelian dialectic has nothing whatsoever to do with Aristotelian dialectic. And it does feel like something similar happened with Gnosis, but we'll get into that. So I've got my post up here. And do you want me to just read it?
Maybe. I mean, unless you have a different idea, but I think that might be a good way to read people through it.
Yeah. We could perhaps share the images in the after production of this, but it's basically an introduction to what is Gnosticism. And this is a very broad overview. And I'm talking There's a professor named Ryan Reeves who teaches theology at Gordon Conwell University, and his description of Gnosticism in his lectures on the history of the early church was that Gnosticism can't really be boiled down to one thing. It's more of a tendency. I mean, you and I both listened to James Lindsay, and he tries to break it down into like, it describes kind of 4 different things, or maybe 3 or 4 different things incidentally. The word can be hard to parse out, but the colloquial sense of the term Gnostic is a tendency. I think Ryan Reeves is correct, and that's what I'm trying to get at. So what I say is, what is Gnosticism? Gnosticism is a mysterious family of religions and semi-religious movements which are united in a belief in an elevation of gnosis, which in their case is a hidden truth that is only acquired through initiation. It's a broad term which has been used to describe both specific historical movements as well as modern mystical traditions, but what defines and unites all Gnostic movements is the belief that the world as we experience it is an illusion. So Plato's cave, perhaps the earliest example of Gnostic thinking, not a Gnostic movement, Gnostic thinking, comes from Plato. In the Republic, Plato asks Glaucon and Adeimantus to imagine men living in a false reality that they do not realize is only an illusion. As an allegory to education, he describes a scenario where men are chained from birth in a cave, where all they can see are the shadows of puppets cast from a fire behind them. The one who escapes and sees daylight is unable to convey the realness of the reality he experiences, gnosis, firsthand, to his friends. So Christian Gnosticism is where Gnosticism acquired its name and its broader reputation in the 1st to 3rd centuries, more or less, under the guise of Christianity. Among the more popular and known Gnostics were Marcion and Valentinus. I'm probably mispronouncing those. They taught interpretations of Christianity which would feel to many modern readers like almost Jungian or Campbellian ideas. But their underlying message was that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament, and that Yahweh was actually the demiurge, the artisan, who created the physical world as a kind of flesh prison for our souls, which exist as pure spirit. In other words, the God of the Old Testament was not God, but was in fact a kind of evil demon, or at the very least a misshapen demon. Jesus, they say, taught us how to live in a manner that would reconnect with the all, which is the true God, because we all have a spark of divinity within us, and escape the prison of the demiurge, and with it escape the corruption of physical existence. So the essence of Gnosticism was summarized, and a lot of people take this quote, and I think for good reason, because it does get to the heart of it. Theodotus the Gnostic described gnosis in the following way. Gnosis is, quote, the knowledge of who we were and what we became, of where we were and whereunto we have been flung, of whereto we are hastening and wherefrom we are redeemed, of what birth is and what rebirth, end quote. Gnosticism is mystical in nature, so that quote sort of conforms there. True understanding of the meaning of cryptic lines comes only to the initiated. This sets the initiated in their knowledge above the knowledge of material existence, which is scientific knowledge. Spiritual understanding is of a higher grade, and the desire to reunite with the pure spirit, supported by mythopoetic allusions to the Garden of Eden, the serpent, wisdom, knowledge, and suffering, is itself the first step in Gnostic initiation. And then I threw in this quote from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says, wretched is the body that is dependent upon a body, and wretched is the soul that is dependent upon these two. So modern Gnosticism, in this spirit of Gnosticism, carries on to this day, albeit not usually in Christian form. Two prominent examples of Gnosticism today include Marxism and transhumanism. And I will say as an aside, I think I botched this slide. This requires like 4 hours of James Lindsay lectures to understand. I should have gone with the more obvious example of modern Gnosticism, which is simulation theory. But I digress. I already published this, and I'm not going to go back and redo it. This is correct. A lot of people say, oh, it feels like a stretch. And Voegelin and Lindsay, I think, make it fairly clear. Anyways, Both treat the historical and material conditions of man as a prison that has corrupted man from his true nature. Whether this true nature is an original state of things or our potentiality is less relevant than it at first appears. In both cases, overt opposition to religion serves as a kind of cover for deeply religious thinking, which can be seen in texts like Marx's Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right or Nick Bostrom's Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. Both depict the truth as something hidden and protected by those in power, that economic forces rule or that death is bad, respectively. The Gnostic aspires to become God through knowledge. So the criticisms of Gnosticism go all the way back to the 2nd century, from St. Irenaeus in the 2nd century to scholars like Eric Voegelin and James Lindsay. Critics have gone after Gnosticism in all of its forms, not just the Christian one. The essence of the critique of Gnosticism is the same today as it was 2,000 years ago, which is that it cannot survive the light of exposure. It must remain clouded in mystery and secrecy, spreading its notions only at the speed at which people can be initiated, which is to say psychologically prepared for belief. In other words, brainwashed. The advocates of Gnosticism rarely, if ever, directly state their beliefs at first, but only allude to a deeper truth or a higher truth, which one must choose to accept in advance, which is called seeking, before understanding is even possible. It was always a pyramid scheme of psychology and wordplay rather than truth. Truth is another conversation. The psychology of Gnosticism. There is a pattern in the groupings of beliefs held by Gnostics, but which are not always religious, indeed, which don't necessarily go together at all. In speaking about Gnosticism and conspiracy theories, and this was, I remember your criticism, he's like, you're speaking negatively of conspiracy theories in 2023? But still, Bishop Robert Barron, I apologize for quoting so many Christians here. It's we're talking about Gnosticism, so Christians have a lot to say. Pointed out that the appeal of Gnosticism, and he was speaking directly about Marx and Hegel, interestingly enough, was, quote, there's a psychological appeal. From the time you're a little kid, who doesn't like that when there's a little in-group that knows? He said, Gnosticism is a kind of philosophy for punks or black metal enthusiasts, rejecting popular beliefs and adopting the antithesis. Many Gnostics hold to beliefs in a flat earth or in elaborate government conspiracies rather than the normal government conspiracies, in historical giants like Nephilim, and all variety of conspiracies of cover-ups, of illusion. Again. The ultimate conspiracy, of course, the bottom of that, tower of turtles, is the conspiracy of reality itself. So there's a book I've been working through called Ritual and the Religion and Religion in the Making of Humanity by Roy Rappaport, who's a very interesting scholar. But in his book, he actually defines Gnosticism as a category of lie. He has a whole taxonomy of lies. And he predicts it's one that we'll actually see more in the future. And he describes it in the following way. Quote, in Gnostic understanding, this world is not the handiwork of a beneficent God, but of a quasi-evil being or beings, as we went over before, the demiurge. As such, it is, in its entirety, a comprehensive illusion. We can declare such a comprehensive falsification of the world's nature, the Gnostic lie. The Gnostic lie becomes ever more dominant and dangerous as social and political, but especially economic, processes become ever more global and ever more highly powered by elaborate, expansive, and concentrated technology. End quote. So he's sort of foreshadowing the simulation theory, perhaps. So the Gnostic Temptation is my last slide. It says, in the end, we can understand Gnosticism as a kind of allure, not unlike the apple of forbidden wisdom that they say you should actually bite. The temptation of hidden knowledge. This is not to say that knowledge in the world cannot be hidden in a sense, nor that initiation has no place, or even that writing cannot be esoteric. But when these things are combined to insinuate that essentially the whole world is an illusion, it is a safe bet that you are being flattered, tacitly praised as intelligent and spiritual, to accept a worldview that validates one's own sense of superiority, even over the world. This may be tempting to people who feel slighted by the world, but it rarely benefits those who accept this poisonous idea in whatever form it takes, and it isn't true. And so that started it all.
So I have a question that I forgot that I was thinking when we were talking about this before, and it just came to me as you were reading through it. Aren't all religions Gnostic?
Well, no. I just had a conversation about this yesterday, actually, with a friend who said, couldn't you read not just all religions, but essentially all belief systems in that way? It's like, oh, there's this truth that if you just understand that that Jesus died for your sins or something, that like that's like the secret truth. There's a few reasons most religions, the vast majority, are not. I think the one major religion that could qualify perhaps as Gnostic is Buddhism. Okay. Buddhism in many ways comes fairly close, but
in the spirit of it does. Like the spirit that we don't like, I totally agree.
Oh, well, right. What it's become. There's like some old forms of Buddhism that we could bring.
No, I mean, I think
friend Clinton into.
This Buddhism proper is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
In the spirit, the part of the spirit that we don't like, but in the terms of we have a different version of reality that you don't know about. Here's our new reality. Like that's like, and obviously anyone who starts a new religion is preaching a new version of reality that no one else knows about, unless it's tribal. I mean, tribal religions evolve organically, and so that's a different thing. But any I guess religion, well, going back to Nietzsche, I guess that jumps us into Zarathustra, the first prophet, and any religion that spreads by going out and converting people from one religion to another one maybe would be closer to Gnostic.
Well, so the sense of Gnosticism, the Gnostic tendency that Professor Ryan Reeves describes, it says has three characteristics. And it's the idea that the world is an illusion. It's not just, oh, the world you're experiencing, like that's all well and good, but like there's this other thing that takes things to the next level that we think you would really like. Like that's not Gnostic. What Gnosticism is like, no. The world that you're living in is actually shadows on the wall of a cave, and you don't know that you're chained in a cave. Like that's very different than saying like, hey, like we live in a tough world. We have some techniques that we think will, like, if you meditate and pray to our divinity, you're going to have a better time of it. Like those are very different kinds of claims. And so the claim that the world is an illusion is like a really big part. The hatred of the flesh is the second part. And I have been accused in my writings of Christianity, of making Christianity out to be more Gnostic than it really is. But there are lots of bits in Christianity that take some acrobatic interpretation to wriggle out of hating the flesh. Buddhism can have that tendency too. I believe certain sects of Hinduism can do that as well. And there are all kind of ascetic traditions around the world from a wide range of different
ascetic traditions. By definition, hate the flesh.
Basically, yeah. So all kinds of ascetic traditions sort of have that, but there are worldviews that see the flesh as evil, and where Gnosticism gets really weird is they'll try to do this weird psychology of accelerationism sometimes, where part of the initiation is you go total degenerate for some number of years to try to numb yourself to the pleasure, the way that, like, I think Hermann Hesse sort of wrote about this with Siddhartha and the Buddha, like enjoying good food and women and all this stuff. And then after some period of that, he comes out and is like, that's not really doing it for me anymore. And so like that was a part for some people. But the desire to push people through that degeneracy actually comes from an opposition to sex, strangely enough. and a hatred of the flesh and a desire to eat minimalist food and a rejection even of earthly beauty as some kind of distraction. So there's the world is an illusion, hatred of the flesh, and the third thing Ryan Reeves lists is salvation through knowledge. And it's not just knowledge in the general scientific, we might say Socratic sense of like a general faith that if we just pursue knowledge, we're going to wind up in a better place. It's specifically knowledge of, as Theodotus said, from whence you have come, which is the one, the all, whence you are going, and all that other cryptic stuff. It's the fact, it's the knowing, the understanding through revelation that the end is really the beginning. And if you truly understand these things, as the Gospel of Thomas says, you won't taste death. It's specific knowledge that is part of their own little thing. Or maybe it's the knowledge that you're in a simulation.
Right.
Although the nature of salvation there is a little bit more mysterious to me.
Well, I think that's where you're talking about separating out the techniques of Gnosticism from Gnosticism proper, or
right.
not
the historical movement from the tendency.
Right. Yeah. The tendency then, as we were discussing earlier this week, the tendency then starts to sound like a shady sales pitch. It starts to sound
right.
And that's the attraction of the occult, and that's one of the things I want to dig into, because then really, if you look at everything through a Gnostic, let's not say look at everything through a Gnostic lens, because that's like right. that's the whole one solution is all solutions thing. But all these words that have an appeal, I think to perhaps guys like you, perhaps guys like me, a lot of our members in the Order of Fire, and even like to the childish part of us that wants to be a wizard, or or to who can read Doctor Strange, or things who were like, I want to. There are secrets of the world that if I could only learn the magic words, I could make things happen and do all these things, these secret things that you can only find out if you go to the mountaintop and talk to the guy. Yeah. And one of the words that struck me, as I had to look it up immediately, and I'm like, this is literally fucking Gnosticism, is esoteric. And as soon as you look at the word esoteric, what it means, it's Gnostic. For the ancient Greeks, belonging to an inner circle.
So
referring originally to the secret teachings of Greek philosophy.
Well, and there is a distinction between occult and Gnostic. Because occult is hidden teachings, but you can believe there are hidden teachings. There are hidden meanings. I subscribe to Leo Strauss's view of Plato, which I subscribed to before I ever fully grasped who Leo Strauss was. I thought Leo Strauss was for some reason connected to neoconservatism because of some propaganda that some people put out years ago. He's not really, but I came to the conclusion that Plato was writing the Republic in this very tricky allegorical manner, and it was Greg Nage writing about the mode of the Ainos as it presents itself in the Iliad and the Odyssey that I was like, oh, that's what's going on. It's this cryptic mode of communication that is designed to prime young people, because if you try to tell a young, passionate young man what to do directly, he's going to want to do the opposite. Which sort of brings us to Gnosticism. But he writes about this mode of speech called an Ainos, where you give this intentionally cryptic mode of speech that is essentially designed to prime young men to think about something and will in advance of the decision. And then once the moment of decision comes, they'll know to make the right choice, but it'll be their decision, not just doing what they're told. And it's an attempt to guide, in the case of Homer, young men down a path of moderation, away from the temptations, the tragic temptation of heroism and death, towards something that's heroic, but you don't necessarily have to die. And you don't have to have funeral games done in your honor for hundreds of years because you gave your life in a sad way. Right. But this got picked up and kind of run with. And people were, we now have esoteric readings of all kinds of things. And the justification for esoteric reasons can be as basic. This is a very common view of, he just didn't want to be direct because he didn't want to be forced to drink hemlock. You could say, is George Orwell's Animal Farm a direct book? Well, I'm not sure he was actually interested in 4-H and agriculture in writing Animal Farm. I think that book had a different subject. Right? Now, that's a pretty ham-fisted, so to speak, esoteric reading. It is full of lots of pig that was not pig. And but you can, imagine the levels of complexity and subtlety that can be introduced. And yeah, it's easy to see why people could kind of go off the rails imagining, intense, incredible layers of symbolism hidden in this Dan Brown novel about this other book, about this other thing, and, kind of lose your way completely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What were we talking about before?
There's so many ways to go. I actually had a really smart thing to say somewhere in the middle of that, but I lost it.
Oh, sorry.
No.
We were talking about the distinction between the occult and the Gnostic.
Right. And that's like I said, that's something I wanted to dig into a little bit, just because, like I said, the language, the esoteric, the occult means hidden. A lot of people don't know that. They think it means Satanism or whatever, but it just means hidden. So it's hidden knowledge. It's secret knowledge. And so much of that world sells that. And whether there is a lot of it that is pulled from Gnosticism. And again, the more I read this kind of stuff, the more I just had a gut dislike. When I read the Red Book, I had a gut dislike of Jung almost immediately. And the more I read of Jung, the more I see all the Gnostic influence, and I'm just kind of it kind of bugs me. But the same is true. But also, there's obviously things about that have captivated a lot of people.
Yeah,
it seemed very magical in the way that one of our members, I think, brought up William Blake, and who was, I think, known as a little bit of a Gnostic.
Yes,
and but Jung also, Jung has this beautiful Red Book that looks like a book of magic. Really, it's like a wizard made it. And then and has all kinds of things about the mind and whatever. It's basically a wizard book. And I have a copy. I didn't bring it out. I should just sell it on whatever. It's probably worth $80. But yeah, you have this look at the world, this hidden knowledge feature of it. And if it's pulling from Gnosticism, this idea that the demiurge idea that the whole world is an illusion, anything that pulls from that, I want to be not solar.
Yeah.
A hard not solar on that, because if the whole world's an illusion, then just fucking kill yourself. Just do it. Fuck you. Our whole thing is embracing that you're actually an animal, and that there is a human nature, and that we are men of the earth. Obviously we have higher aspirations, but you don't get to we're not trying to literally ascend to godhood in a literal way. So we're not Mormon.
Well, it's very funny to listen to the simulation theory advocates say, someone asked them, what changes about life if the world is an illusion? And they're like, well, nothing changes. Nothing changes. And they're very insistent that nothing is different except the psychological things that they want to make. You don't have to take things quite as seriously. And they're trying to therapize and reduce anxiety. It's if nothing changes, why are you so insistent on this thing? Why are you pushing for this so hard? Why is this so captivating and fascinating to you?
And this thing that you really can't prove.
Right. In any direction.
Who's running the simulation? It's who's God? Yeah. It's the same. There's so many people trying to reinvent God.
Right.
in different ways. When you get in the technology sector, it's all these different ways where it's
Oh,
either aliens or it's someone's running a simulation or whatever. We're all part of a computer game. Who knows? But it doesn't. It's all the same thing, and it doesn't really answer the question of who is God.
Right.
It all takes it back to the same place.
Yeah. And the simulation one is funny because I was criticizing simulation theory several months ago. And I had a number of arguments and pertaining to that. If we want to go back to the origin of this, the modern form of the simulation, I mean, there's the Baudrillard position, which is kind of interesting, hyper reality and so forth. But it comes, the modern version comes from Nick Bostrom. And he has this mathematical model that is based on the presumed inevitability of real life ancestor simulations, lifelike ancestor simulations that are indistinguishable from reality. And presuming that as a possibility, which it will be at some point in the future, it's only a matter of time before those arise. One of three things must be true. And the other key factor is there's an unlimited number of these possible ancestor simulations. So the odds are there are three possibilities, he believes. One, we wipe ourselves out as a species before we reach that point. Two, we lose interest in ancestor simulations. Or three, we are mathematically, almost certainly, overwhelmingly already living in an ancestor simulation because time is cut out, because an ancestor simulation could be set in 2023 or in the 1950s or whenever. Mm-hmm. The thing that was interesting to me was why do we not talk about option two as much, that we lose interest in ancestor simulations, given how much, how detrimental we know this to be? And my view is that there is a condition that some people have called derealization or depersonalization syndrome. Mm-hmm. And it's the sensation that either depersonalization is your body doesn't feel like you feel like a robot almost. Mm-hmm. And derealization is the feeling that the world isn't real, that reality isn't real. It's like you're living in a dream. And it's a sensation many people have during waking hours. From what I've read, there appears to be maybe a connection between spending too much time on the internet and having these conditions. Because, yeah, I know, right? Because what happens is when you're spending all your time online, mm-hmm. but your body is in the physical world and your attention is divided between your phone, the internet, and the real world, then your experience of the real world loses its perception of causation. You walk around the world and things just seem to happen. You get in your car and you're at work without feeling like you ever drove there. Now that's, a common one I'm bringing up because a lot of people have experienced this because you do it so many times that you don't need to pay attention and you get a sense of what that experience is like. But if your attention is distracted mm-hmm. all the time, not just your commute, but all of life can begin to take on that sense. Also, drugs can do this a little bit too. There might be a little bit of crossover between the psychonaut culture and the Gnostic culture. Not very mysterious for a mystery religion. Yeah. So, I think belief in and fascination with the simulation theory might be symptomatic of too much time on the internet in that way.
Or in any kind of fantasy world.
Right.
You could have done it with playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Before the internet. Anyone who is, all forms of escapism in which you're hiding in another world. I mean, that used to be a thing for, that was a story before we had the internet. The boy who spent too many times with stories and books and they couldn't get out of them, and spent too much time with his head in the clouds.
There's a famous quote where J.R. Tolkien is accused of writing escapist novels, and he says, "Of course, it's escapist. The world is a rough place." Now, of course, the world he created is also rough, and there's a moral there. I think there's the world we want to live in is also dangerous and terrifying, and requires courage, and is based on intensely well-researched history of our world as well. So it's part of the compellingness is that it has tie-ins with Beowulf and England.
Yeah, well, our creature, and this was actually mentioned, I think, in the Matrix in a roundabout kind of way, in terms of their criticism of humanity.
Oh yes,
Of course, the people who wrote
Agent
that, the whole
Smith's speech.
thing. But yeah, Agent Smith's speech. But we cannot imagine a world without conflict. And I've made this point many times. We can't imagine a world without conflict because it's a story in which nothing happens. Without conflict, nothing happens. And so, like, even when you have the Star Trek Enterprise, they have to go to. They've had all the problems of humanity figured out, but they still have to go out into space and fight people and have it conflict, because otherwise we lose all will to live.
We can't call it an end of history, perhaps.
Yeah. And you can't have that because we can't tolerate that as a species because we need conflict. That's like someone just got that tattooed on the that life is conflict, peace is death, like symbol that I made a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's true. Like we need a story arc. We know exactly what a story arc looks like. They have it mapped out perfectly in Hollywood. And they obviously many people have done it before that. They just stole it from people who did it before that. We need a story arc.
Yeah.
And I like that about us as a species. I mean, I like that we need to have things happen.
And specifically at a grand level, when we're talking about cosmology and like creation stories and eschatology, what happens at the end, our grand stories shouldn't be concluding in and then there was peace,
happily ever after.
Like that's not a good story.
That's why heaven never sounds fun.
Yeah. Well, and like that's I think to me that is the attraction. I'm not a big aficionado of the Nordic stuff. I mean, I did my time studying it, but like it was kind of interesting. But like there is something inherently attractive of the idea of a cycle where everything concludes in this fiery bloodbath or whatever, but it starts over again, and there's no conclusion, as there is with Christianity and in dare I say Orthodox Gnosticism, where we're reunited with the all, or find samsara or nirvana or whatever these planes of eternal peace, the whatever language that you want to use with it.
Yeah, which I mean, that takes us back to the dragon,
right?
I mean, that's uniting with the nothingness, basically uniting with the flat line.
Well, and it's there is no distinction between all and nothing. Like I think that was one of the great points that was sort of reiterated in your essay on the dragon negation, which is that like death is the disintegration of identity. The matter that composes you doesn't go anywhere. Right. It's just reunited with everything.
I mean, but you are gone, like all differentiated.
Yeah,
you are not anything. You're just atoms.
And at a certain level, like the dragon negation is correct from a sufficiently objective perspective. Nothing lasts.
Yeah,
everything is one insofar as it is composed of matter or connected in some physics kind of way. But that framework, that way of thinking, that objective framework is so antithetical to the interests and spirit of a living organism and its desire to maintain its cell wall, to maintain its identity distinct from what is outside of it. Is very like it is an important thing, I think, for people to dwell upon who've maybe tripped on mushrooms one too many times, or read the Gospel of Thomas or too many times.
That reconnection, we're all the same. It's just so dangerous in the sense of like it's so easily used, like in the way that these Gnostic theories, like the way James Lindsay talks about different aspects of Marxism and the way it's become woke theory and all that kind of stuff, and the way it kind of populates throughout the culture. But I mean, the people who think that they're going to, the joke of that is that the people who think that they're going to, create this new thing or, capture the form of the means of production or whatever, are just pawns. And they aren't going to do anything. I mean, they're gonna play their role in making that happen, and then, as what always happens, is the oligarchs take over, and so this is really just a death philosophy for plebs.
Yeah. Well, it is a bit of a, as I think a lot of them think that they're in the know. They're like, oh yeah, we're gonna help this, but we're already one step ahead, and it's still a pyramid scheme. It's still a power game of musical chairs that you're playing. And everyone in that little rung, except that one poor true believer who doesn't know what he's getting into. But I'll bet most of them do understand, the serious activists. There's the sort of, I hate to use the term, but the NPC minded, go along to get along types who are like, oh yeah, we support it. But
that's the really good, the ones that know all the theory and have read all the Foucault and read all the those are few and far between. I mean, they absolutely exist. I went to school with them, but it is and most people who've gone to college, they know some of those guys, right, or some of those girls, but most of the people who go to the whatever communist thing have not done the reading in the way that most Americans can't run through the Constitution or any of the other stuff. Right. They're just they know they get the vibe, and they're sold on the pyramid scheme side. Oh, we have a secret tooth. Here we're going to make something great happen. The James Lindsay thing with that diversity thing that you go through, the diversity inclusion thing, that pledge in different levels of I forget, was it different levels of tolerance? No, it's tolerance wasn't the part. It was no, it wasn't inclusion. I would say there's a word that
I know
there's a word. But
they have these specific words.
Yeah. But it was to get to the point where it was dignity. That literally everyone has dignity. Everyone has dignity,
and they have no matter what they do, layers or something. And then when you hit level 7, it's oh, this sounds really good. This sounds like what we have in America. But then there are levels past that.
Yeah, 5, 6, and 7 sound like America, and then the ones past that are and no one can be judged.
Yeah, it's basically it's actually undoing, and it's moving towards that Gnostic unity with the one. Yeah, in a way. And they're using the language of dignity as they'll use any language they can get a hold of. And we should mention, because for some people, as was pointed out in my post, comparing Marx and transhumanists to Gnostics can feel like a pledge, especially for people who like to nerd out on the Nag Hammadi texts and stuff. I can't encourage people strongly enough who have an interest in this to check out Eric Voegelin and James Lindsay. There are claims that Karl Marx straight up plagiarized the Corpus Hermeticum in his economic and philosophical manuscripts in 1841. It's very if Gnosticism can be a historical movement and also a just kind of psychological inclination, but also a technique, a marketing technique, so much of that technique is here in the Marxist stuff, and really in Hegel's stuff, who I think we've talked about a little bit in the past.
Yeah, we have. I mean, and definitely when we post this online, let me get a list of good links for you. Obviously, we have a couple from the post, but of where people can follow up and listen to this. Because honestly, as you know, I was resistant to the Lindsay thing and the Gnostic thing when it was first mentioned, because my background with Gnosticism, not that I was ever agnostic, but my basic perceptions of it where I'm this is just weird occultists and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm that's not the wait. Why are you applying this to all these things? And but honestly, after listening to a few of his lectures, I feel like he's just saying a lot of the stuff that I was saying in becoming a barbarian and a lot of my work, but obviously with a whole different layer of research. I was feeling my way through it, and he's like, here's what they're doing, like piece by piece, from the philosophy that they're coming from. So I feel like they're very aligned in what we're saying, but he definitely like has the whole system down. So I can't recommend that stuff enough, just so people get a little bit of a frame of what this it does open up a lot of things. I mean, it is, like when I read it, sometimes I'm like, I feel like I really want to, it's not my area of interest and I don't want to sit and read these texts, but I feel like I want to make sure that he's not messing with something. Because I want to do that with everything. I don't want to be like, well, James Lindsay said, so therefore I believe. Seems I like primary sources for things. But
of course, and I read a little bit of Marx's writings. This early text is like critique of Hegel's philosophy of right is actually very interesting reading. But I was like, is he really capturing like the spirit of Marxists correctly? I spent about 6 months listening to a Marxist podcast that I found called Chapo Trap House. Actually very funny, very, very clever, enjoyable podcast to listen to. But he was right. They are. he was not mischaracterizing them. Okay. He focuses on the bad things for sure. But he's not mischaracterizing it, at least in my opinion.
Oh, I don't think he's mischaracterizing like woke and all those movements at all. I mean, I have some background and understand reading a good bit of queer theory and also feminist theory and all that stuff. And that, yes, that's exactly what they're doing. Like his characterization of that stuff is on point. I just mean the way he's using
Gnostic.
Like whether I'd have to, like, I feel like I'd have to go back to a bunch of primary texts to be like, is that really it? But like, I'm willing to accept that as a baseline assumption right now, because I'm not going to. The thing about Gnosticism is there's so much. I have an aesthetic kind of whenever like you get anywhere close to the Bible, and so like I just like, so I'm not going to do it. But
fair. I went back and read over the Gospel of Thomas a couple of times, and there's the apocryphal Gospel of John, which is just like if Revelation is like New Testament stuff on mushrooms, this is like apocryphal Gospel of John is like that on ayahuasca or like salvia. It's absolutely nuts. But the Gospel of Thomas is like the other Gospels in about 2/3 of the time. A lot of it's just repetition of other things, but some of the lines are noticeably different. Like there's this. If I could read just a couple of them. Here's one where the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you discovered then the beginning that you look for the end? For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who will take his place in the beginning. He will know the end and will not experience death." That's not like the other stuff, That's not like the. And then there's just some weird shit that makes no sense. This is not my favorite verse, but it's up there because every scholar who talks about this has to mention this and has to say no one knows what the fuck he's talking about. So Jesus says, "Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed by man, and cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." Just
this is what I was thinking earlier that I lost, is that I was just spacing out and kind of remembering. Do you remember Cody from Wolfgang?
Yes.
He had a lot of tattoos like on his face and stuff.
Yeah.
He had that Von Vogel movement. That was kind of his thing. But in the party yurt, when we still had a yurt, he gave the most amazing piece of drunken performance art I've ever experienced. And he created an entire theater piece that he just went on a tangent and wouldn't let go, to the point where he basically gave this Charles Manson-esque speech aligning everyone against the man in the chair. And he literally picked one guy. He was in the chair, and he's like, "Don't you think that it's time that we all stood up against the man in the chair? Haven't you had enough? of what the man in the chair does. You see all this around us, all this, all these lies. The man, he had everybody in that tent ready to like take down the man in the chair. This poor guy Mike, who was like sitting there, and I think that was the night when Clinton hit him with a chair. But but it was the most Manson-esque thing. He's like, you know, and I know about the man in the chair, and like it was this ongoing thing that was totally free form. But that's really what a lot of this is. Like when you're reading that stuff in the Gospel of Thomas, is like you can become a lion, or are you the lion, or the lion inside you? And you know, like all this kind of upside down, inside out. Is it left or it's right? It's confused. It's intentionally confusing language, and it's a whole bunch of intentionally contradictory things that you use to break people down.
Yeah,
and be like, hey, anything's true. Maybe what I say is true. Like, and you just get kind of crazy with it. And I mean, if you've ever listened to Manson speak, that's the way Charles Manson talks.
So,
and
I have two scandalous allegations I want to make. The first is that a guy I really like, Scott Adams, who's one of the big proponents of simulation theory, up there with like Elon Musk. But Musk is a technologist. Like, it's like, oh yeah, he's interested in AI and stuff. But everyone knows Scott Adams from Dilbert. But the people who don't follow him online probably don't know as much that he's also a trained hypnotist. And so what hypnosis is, it's not just persuasion. It's persuasion by first getting people into a frame of like higher receptivity.
Right.
You get them into a state where they're able to receive you. And that's how it works. And I wonder, like, is his pushing simulation theory because he really believes it? Or is it because the more people he can get to believe in simulation theory, the more susceptible they will be to believe other things? Because everything in this world is an illusion. So they'll believe, so anything could be true.
Right.
And then the other scandalous allegation I want to make is in terms of magic and this kind of language is someone who I'm beginning to think might be trying to use magic is James Lindsay. In a number of recent talks, he's talked about the importance of reconciling reason and faith against mysticism. He says mysticism is the problem here. It's always been the problem. And there's room for faith and reason to work together. Faith requires reason, and reason requires faith, because reason without faith is the dragon, basically, of negation. And I don't necessarily disagree that reason by itself is insufficient, but what exactly is the difference between faith and mysticism?
You got me. I was kind of my first result as that started coming out of your mouth. I was like, tomato.
Yeah.
You know, like I believe something that is unprovable, and because a whole bunch of other people told me to believe it, is not right. Is what's the difference? Yeah. I think mysticism just means like there's more crystals and incense. You know? It's just weirder and more esoteric, you know. But there's that word again. But
I mean, like there's this idea of gnosis, which as it's being used is this revealed truth, but it's being passed on through this tradition and through these books. When you read a Gnostic text, you are not gaining gnosis in the sense that is meant on the Oracle of Delphi, the Oracle to Apollo in Delphi. It's not that knowledge by experience. It is, you read a fucking book. You know, those are different. Which is maybe this is supreme irony, but I don't want to push back against James Lindsay too much on that, because frankly, I think it's a good cause, but it's something perhaps worth noting in terms of recognizing these things. And one of the things that James Lindsay says is, when you get down to it, so much of what these Marxists do is just puns. It's literally just puns. Using or as philosophers would say, equivocation, but like when you use equivocation in Greek terms, like, you know, gnosis or episteme or German terms, you know, it flies under the radar for most people who don't speak Greek or German or don't study the classics, and so they can be bamboozled into thinking that dialectic meant a back and forth across history, or rather with different forces, rather than, no, it's literally just argument. So like there is we've talked a little bit about Socrates and about there's this instinct to kind of to see all this and to reject intellectuals and to reject intellectual stuff and be like, oh, only dishonesty and tomfoolery comes from that world. But I think a lot of otherwise well-meaning people get taken in by this stuff without some education isn't the right word, some familiarity with these techniques.
Well, I believe in the X speak, formerly Twitter speak, they would be referred to as mid. The basically like the people who are trying to sound smart but aren't really that smart. Like they haven't done all the research, whatever, but they've basically done. Oh, they've done AI. They've basically taken the learning language model and they know how to replicate the language, which is what I learned how to do in art school. Is basically like if you use this language, I mean, basically, as soon as you say dialectic, like Marxists are like, cool, like there's a handful of there's a vocabulary that if you can deploy that vocabulary in the appropriate way that sounds right, then you think you sound smart, and you think you sound like you're in the in crowd now. And there's a lot of those people, and that's a lot of a lot of feminist writers and a lot of like just writers in general, not the top ones, but the people who went to school for gender studies and whatever. They're just learning how to deploy the language in a way that like gets them the grade and then gets them a job in diversity inclusion.
Maybe my favorite essay of all time is George Orwell's essay on the politics of the English language, where he makes fun of those people from his day. There's a particular guy he made fun of called Harold Lasky, who is the model for one of the villains in the Ayn Rand novel. But he was basically the Judith Butler of his day, and his writing was the Judith Butler writing of his day. And he was one of the characters that Orwell mocked for, like, when you actually think visually about what these guys are writing, because these people who just let the sentences write themselves, they just copy the language, their metaphors become ridiculous. They're like, there's one line of like, the jackbooted octopus of fascism has swung its swan song or something. And like, if you pause to read that sentence slowly and you're forced to imagine an octopus singing a swan song, you're like, who the fuck wrote this? This is nonsensical. It's like
will give you that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is the problem with just the repetition of language that that politics can get you into, and this kind of Gnostic religious language of the pleroma. Oh, it's not wisdom, it's Sophia, which is different. It's
and then it makes you sound cool and you're in the in crowd and you're
It's like the Nag Hammadi. It's like the Nag Hammadi is not a book. You mean like the Gospel of Thomas and these like 12 other texts. The language can lead you in a direction of its own. And what I love about George Orwell's essay is that it's not just pointing out and mocking the language of these people, but he also gives a kind of direction out of that. And I mean, we've talked a little bit for positively and negatively about Steven Pinker. But one of Steven Pinker's other excellent books is The Sense of Style, which is about how to write well and basically writing simply and clearly and directly. And so much of the Gnostic stuff, as I tried to say in my little Instagram post about how they always have to kind of hide in this murky, in the dark, and only let little bits out as you get more open to it. Good writing is direct. It isn't this esoteric stuff. And people within technical fields can fall into obscure writing by accident. It's very clear to other people who are within the field, but if they're writing to a lay audience, I'm I'm not the best at this, and some of my writing need to work on that. But it's not because I'm trying to obscure things, and it is a shortcoming that I need to get better at. And I think the Gnostic tendency is to think, oh no, the more vague sounding means the more profound, and the more precisely Greek is like spiritually higher in some capacity. It's like, no, it's not, because it's not about the language.
Well, that's kind of my thing all the time. I'm like, well, can you say that in simple language and break it down? Because there are so many people that it has to be complicated and contradictory, or they can't think that it's interesting, or they can't think that it's true, or they can't connect with it. I think that's half the reason that a certain kind of guy is drawn into some of the, especially things like orthodoxy or like forms of Christianity, that whereas like they can dig so deep into it and it'll never make sense. But they can spend hours like going into the contradictions of things and trying to work them out.
You know who the best ASMR voice is on YouTube, and the gateway drug to half of this is Alan Watts. I could listen to him for hours. He's very pleasant to listen to. I don't know if any of it means anything, but I'm sure some of it does.
I tried to read a book by him, and it was a little too Buddhist, and it annoyed me. And I was like, ugh.
No,
like I ordered it. I was like, this sounds cool, and I was like, this is irritating.
You can't read him. You have to listen to him. Listen to 5 minutes of him talk.
Like he's leading you into the thing.
It's the feeling of spirituality without like learning anything. Very pleasant. Very, I do recommend. Just don't make the mistake of thinking you're learning something.
Well, I was going to say that one of the things that an unintentional parody of a lot of these occult worlds and these Gnostic worlds and this language that we're talking about, the language of esoteric forms and initiation, H.P. Lovecraft did a fantastic parody without trying. Because he was just writing fiction and he probably thought it was as cool as everybody else. But the whole idea of writing a Necronomicon, that there's a secret book that no one, if you find it, it's going to change everything. And it has all the secrets of the elder things of a reality that exists beyond this reality. And and the death cult of the Cthulhu worshippers is basically the whole thing, that Cthulhu is going to come back, and we want him to come back and kill everybody and eat us last. And that's the way I feel about AI accelerationists and like a lot of the communists and all that. I think that it's a death cult, and they just think they're going to get eaten last. But the language, H.P. Lovecraft did such a good job of like what would lure people into the fact that there are actually people who pretend to believe that that's real in the world. Because I used to go in Portland, me and my buddy Rex actually used to go to the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival that they had for many years in Portland, and there's a whole world built around his genre, and like people make short films, people make feature films. I knew a guy who made a pretty good one, and there are people who have statues of Cthulhu in their house, and like all this stuff becomes like this other world, and you can actually buy the Necronomicon. People have written the Necronomicon and put it online, but it just shows like how attractive that kind of like there's a secret
that
knowledge.
Chthonic.
Yeah,
Who doesn't love the word chthonic?
Right.
CTHONIC.
Oh yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, it sounds cool just because
just
hard to
the
spell.
word. Just the word. But taking the satires and the spoofs in a slightly different direction. There's a book, I haven't read this one, I've been meaning to, but which has been recommended by another guy I like a number of times. It's called The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. It was his first novel.
With Sean Connery.
Yes, I haven't seen the movie either, but supposedly it's like a spoof of a Dan Brown before Dan Brown was even a thing. And like the characters are apparently like, it's very, very smart. They're like making joke puns in Latin. They're like but they try to create a Dan Brown style, like secret society conspiracy as a joke and write stories about it. But then like halfway through, they realize like, wait, the conspiracy is real. And they're like, but how could it be real? It was a joke. And they like accidentally spoof a conspiracy into real life or something to that, to that effect. But it's apparently quite a funny novel, making fun of this tendency. And I mean, it's, as Bishop Barron has said, like the Gnostic heresy, which is the Gnostic tendency, has been with us for 2,000 years longer. It predates Christianity. It probably goes back to Egypt before even Plato. And like if Roy Rappaport is to be believed, and it tends to increase with technology of a global scale and increasing, connection with our lives, we're probably going to see more of it in the future. So,
how related is it to autism?
That is a good question, because I feel like it can go either way. I feel like autists could go down the rabbit hole.
The world, like the world's not real. I'm just like, like it's
or autists could go the Saint Irenaeus route and be like, this is not real. And it's not real because of this one detail. It's not real. It's not real because like it's the wrong spirit. It's like, no. They get this one thing wrong, so it's all wrong. And then they devote their life to say, one of my favorite arguments by Saint Irenaeus, which I learned 2 days ago, is in his refutation of the Gnostics. He said, the Gospel of Thomas is absolutely not true because there can only be 4 Gospels. There could only ever be 4 Gospels because there are only 4 winds. And the Holy Spirit, being like the wind, could only be expressed in 4 books, not 5. So it's just the 4.
I feel like that's like religious writing to me. That's the way it all sounds. It's all how many angels can dance on the head of a pin.
He did have some good stuff in there too, but that one stuck out as particularly fun.
Yeah, no, clearly that must be. But right. Cool. Well, this is basically what I wanted to get into as far as this goes. I mean, we've gone a little over what we normally do. It's not like we have a limit, but I just wanted to kind of address some of these things because the allure of the language and the contradictions, I think, between what we're trying to go for with solar idealism and some of these occult traditions, which again, occult in Gnostic aren't the same thing, but they're, like I said, the Venn diagram is pretty, there's a big Venn diagram crossover between occult and Gnosticism and then there's Hermeticism, which we didn't really talk about.
Yeah. But as it pertains to solar idealism and the sun, this, what is the sun if not the illuminator? It shines down and makes things clear for us. Yeah. All of the Gnosticism, like the occult in general and Gnosticism specifically, is all about digging through and finding what's secret, what's hidden in the muck, what's hidden in the shadows. And in the sense of, I mean, you don't even need to read Nietzsche. You could read Yukio Mishima and Sun and Steel, and his approach to, we were just talking about Gnostics and words and language. Like Yukio Mishima's approach to language and the way that words eventually eat themselves like white ants, like that. It felt like he was from an Asian perspective, sort of finding the Gnostic spirit in the writers of his day, completely apart from the sort of Alexandrian tradition over on our side of the Pacific. Mm-hmm. So like what is solar is not like, if it has any character in style, I feel like it's best embodied by like those Native American orators who we have texts from, who, whether it was for translation reasons or just their natural style, had this very direct manner of speaking that Socrates it's claimed to try to do, but kind of couldn't manage in spite of himself. Um, but which you hear like Chief Sealth or some of these other Sioux chief and Comanche chiefs really do speak directly. Here's what we see. Here's what you said. Here's what we say. Here's how it is. And what Orwell sort of idealized and what Steven Pinker idealized is in direct, clear language. As soon as you try to express these Gnostic ideas clearly, without attachment to these magical words, it loses all of its magic. And I think that the idea of sunlight as a disinfectant could be distilled into clarity in language as a disinfectant from being mystified.
Yeah. Well, and there is a crossover though, because there's just a different fantasy, I think. The idea of like learning the secret things under the mountain, going into the cavern and learning the scenes from the secret book. Man, I had this book for when I was a kid. It had a picture, and it was like Time Life books. It was one on the devil or something like that, and it had this picture of these guys. There was a secret place that you learned to go actually learn stuff from the devil under the mountain. It's some like ancient lore, and I thought that was the coolest thing when I was a kid. Like, oh, there's a place where you can go and learn the secret lore, and that's really what aesthetically that's what all of this is. And then the solar thing. I mean, myth is also about getting caught up in language a little bit,
very much
heroic language, and it's just what kind of language and what is the use that, as with all things, what end are we trying to go to? And that's like I said, that's why I'm not okay with Buddhism generally, is because I don't like the end. Like, I see the end, I don't want to be initiated because I already know what the end is. Like, that's been made clear. And so that's with so many of these things, like initiated into what and why and for who. And that's there's so many people, but people love the idea of initiation because they are like the idea of ritual.
What if initiation was called something different? Would people still be as enamored with initiation if they had to call it just
a state change?
Yeah.
A ritual state change.
Yeah.
That's actually, I mean, technically, I guess that's probably what it is. But
we're just changing. Yeah.
Yeah. Or ritual change in status, or identity. That's
it would lose a little bit of its allure, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Because then it's just words describing exactly what it is. But, like, we do want that. We want the romance of language. I mean, that's what makes poetry good.
Well, we use language and we can be motivated by language, but when we're evaluating what is true, and when we're trying to, like, I think there's a tremendous difference between, describing an epic battle scene that is motivating us with the full power of our, linguistic capabilities to really bring it to life and to put you there in that moment and be like, this is pre-football game motivation for your like linebackers, is like hold the line or whatever. Like that is very different than using the power of language as a kind of as evidence that something is true, or letting your feelings carry you to that conclusion. And this is one of the things before the Gnostic post, I got in trouble for the Islam post. Many of the Muslims I've seen who were converted to Islam did so after they learned Arabic and then read the Quran in Arabic. And they found the writing is too perfect. It is so good in Arabic. There's a sense that it had to be divine. And I mean, that's kind of how I feel about Homer, to be totally honest. I don't even speak Greek, just a feeling of the language, even in its translated form, and that's the content. Now, I don't take that to be evidence that it really was channeled from the muses or anything like that. I do think it came from a person or a couple people or a tradition culminating in a person who wrote things down, most likely. But there's a sense there. There's a sense, and if you take that as like, oh yeah, this is artistically powerful, and I love that, that's very different than saying, and therefore it's true, or some path to truth.
Right. No, I think, and that's an important distinction. I mean, that's. I'll just slide this comment in, even though it's not relevant. But the other day I put on Twitter because I was thinking about it. And I'm like, trying to learn about Greek religion is like trying to learn about Christianity by reading Milton and Dante, because there's no sacred text. Like there's that, but they're plays. Like they're plays or epic poets or whatever, and it just struck me as how much of Greek literature, especially when I was traveling in Greece and reading some of the plaques about things and whatever, how much of the Greek literature was written for contests, in which a lot of the information that we have about the gods is some guy writing the god as a character in the way that in Milton would write, it makes Satan a character, or in the way that they're writing characters for their god, but we're taking that as like this is exactly what all of them believed, and that's not true. Or there's no way to prove that, because there's no holy book, there's just literature, and it's a really interesting thing. And I just thought that really struck me. I'd never thought about that before, but like it's a very striking difference between learning about those religions and learning about like learning about Christianity or something like that, or Islam or whatever. It's something that has, these are the books, this is what they believed.
Yeah.
Very different.
And we can pick up some of the details about their religious practice from the things that are described in a mundane manner. Yeah. Like they very repetitiously, almost casually describe, oh yeah, then we had to go, we did a sacrifice, and so such and such person did the sacrifice, and he cut this and this way to Poseidon or whoever. And you're like, okay, we're not spending 2 pages of lines describing in epic detail all of that in the way that we would describing Achilles arming himself or something that's truly stylized. So that probably describes in some general fashion a behavior. Yeah. But what it does look like is that like these were religions of convention, and piety was, are you following custom? Are you paying your due respect, not just to the gods and their statues and stuff, but also like to your parents and to like your neighbor and to guests? Hospitality was a pious duty, but so much of it was custom, observing the holidays, putting up your Christmas lights, shooting off the fireworks, doing all the customs correctly. And like truth seemed to have come to the table later.
Yeah, or just written. I mean, because we had the Vedic stuff where they actually wrote stuff down, but it's just an interesting, I think, distinction, and I think helps people maybe understand a little bit better what they're dealing with versus, because everybody wants. Someone asked me the other day, like, if I want to learn more about this, I'm reading the Iliad right now. If I want to learn more about Greek religion, where do I go? And I'm like, well, we could make some suggestions, but know this. We don't know. Know this, and the same is true, obviously, of the Norse stuff and all the Germanic material. It's in the Vedic stuff. There's a lot of extrapolation, and like I think they probably did this. There's a lot of that in history. But anyway, it gets us, I think, far enough away from our topic that we should probably wrap it up. But I think it's good. I hope some of our readers and people who are interested in solar idealism maybe understand the difference, some of the objections, because when I see the occult symbolism and Gnosticism and stuff like that, I'm already kind of like, no, and but it's hard to explain why. So I hope we explained why a little bit better.
Well, and it's also, I don't think it's bad for guys to go through that for some time. It's like I think there's a lot of stupid shit. Yeah, I think it's very easy for people to look around at this. I'm plagiarizing from Curtis Yarvin here. at the lane culture that they're fed in schools, the sort of the basic stories, and especially if they're a little precocious, to be like, well, this is obviously bullshit,
Right.
and it's lame bullshit, and to say, what's the opposite of that? And that's where, if you're lucky, you end up in Nordic black metal. If you're unlucky, you end up in worse places. There are all kinds of like anti-mainstream rabbit holes you can go down, and I think it's almost indicative and symptomatic of a certain level of intelligence and honesty and courage to have gone down those.
Absolutely.
But it's also important at some point before you're 30, ideally, to recognize that the opposite of a falsehood is not therefore the truth.
Right.
And that the opposite of one bad thing can be a different bad thing, or even a worse thing. So, like, there is something better than the mainstream that isn't just an impulsive, reactive oppositionalism to the mainstream, which I think Gnosticism kind of feels that way. It's like, God exists, but he's evil. It's like that's a little I don't think you're getting closer to the truth by rejecting in rejecting that initial lie, you know.
Right. Yeah, and the oppositionalism, just for the sake of oppositionalism, and all of us, I think, if you're a little spicy, just generally as a person, and I certainly am. If you tell me I'm not allowed to do something, I definitely want to do it. So we understand that, obviously, and we're understand that the people were attracted to what we're talking about. But like you said, the opposite direction isn't necessarily the correct direction, and we're trying to reason out, like, what is a good direction? Yeah, what is a good direction? If we were the first men, and we wanted to figure out what the first direction was, what would we choose? If we had
what's a non-reactive direction?
Right. Exactly. Which sometimes it'll be closer to one side, sometimes it'll be closer to the other side. But it just depends where it is. So, but anyway, this is an awesome conversation. I think this is one of our better podcasts. So
I'm glad you think so.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was good. And so everybody, thanks for listening, and stay solar.
Pater is the cultural arm of the Order of Fire. For more, visit PH2T3R.com.